Hey traders, in this video I want to introduce you guys to the technical analysis namespace. Now in future lessons we will be covering these inbuilt TA functions in much greater detail than this lesson. This is literally just an introductory crash course into the TA namespace. So I'm going to create another blank indicator here and I'm going to call this one overlay TA and set overlay to true on here. I'll change the plot to NA. And I'll save this and I'm just going to call this delete because I'm going to delete the script after I'm done with this lesson. And I'm going to add this to the chart. And let me open this up. I'll copy this title, paste it in here. That will make more sense. So now we have two scripts on our chart, TA namespace and TA namespace overlay. The reason I've got two scripts on my chart here, two separate scripts, is because in this overlay one, I want to draw moving averages. And in this technical analysis box down here, I want to draw things like the RSI. So the first thing to mention with these indicators is that in PineScript, you cannot draw into your own indicator box and over price action in the same script, at least not presently. Personally, I really hope they add that functionality to PineScript in the future. But for now, if you want to draw onto price action over the bars on your chart and into an indicator box, you need to create two separate scripts, essentially. Which can be a problem, well not a problem, but an inconvenience when you're creating a script that depends on data from both. So for example, I have a RSI strategy that it's sort of a mean reversion strategy. When the RSI is overbought, it looks for certain candlestick patterns to go short. And when the RSI is oversold, it looks for candlestick patterns to go long. And I like to see the RSI on my chart being drawn and the key levels that I'm looking for when the RSI goes overbought and oversold. And I also like to draw the setups that my script detects onto the actual chart over price action with my stop loss and take profit and all of that drawn onto the chart. Now the problem I have with doing that is I needed to split my strategy into two scripts in order to be able to draw over price action and into my own indicator box. Now the problem with that obviously is you've got two different settings menus. So if you change one script settings, you need to change the other ones manually. Now that TradingView have introduced libraries, which we will cover later in the course, there may be ways to work around this issue because a library script can be referenced by multiple scripts. So the same source code in your library can be referenced by multiple scripts. So in the future, we will look into potential ways to mitigate the problem of needing to draw into two different scripts based on what you want to display on your chart. But for now, let's forget about all that because we'll cover that when we get to that problem when developing actual tools, trading tools and indicators. For now, let's just introduce you guys to the essential technical analysis indicators that you'll be working with in most of your scripts. Now, you will all have different preferences and trading styles, ways that you employ these indicators. I'm going to show you the ways I personally prefer to employ them. Obviously, not everyone is going to share my perspective on how to trade these indicators and candlestick patterns and market conditions and so on. So just take all of the lessons from now on in the course as examples of what's possible with Pine. The whole idea here is that I'm teaching you how to fish and then you can go off and catch whatever you want, so to speak. I'm not teaching you hard set in stone rules. I'm just teaching you the core foundations of PineScript and then you can do with that what you will. So to get started, let's draw a RSI value onto this technical analysis namespace script, this script that is drawing into its own indicator box. So to do that, we can create a new variable here called RSI and initialize its value as, and here is where the technical analysis namespace comes in. This namespace, TA.control space or command space on a Mac, will list all of the technical analysis indicators we have to work with. Technical analysis functions. Some of these aren't indicators. Some of these are just functions that help assist your analysis of price action. But we do have a bunch of TA functions in here, and this is where they are all kept. As my grandmother would say, this is where all of our TA functions live. And so let's find the RSI here. It'll be in alphabetical order, so here. And you can see it takes a source and a length. So if I click on this, open up parentheses, the source can be anything. By default, it's normally the closing price. And the default period is normally 14. But you can obviously change this to whatever you want. Let's plot this onto our chart. Save my script. See what we get. There we have an RSI drawing onto the chart. Notice that it doesn't display the overbought and oversold levels or the extremes of the indicator. If you're going to draw an indicator like the RSI in your script manually like this, you need to code that upper and lower boundary. So there are multiple ways you can do that. You could just use a plot, a simple plot. I could plot 80 and 70 and 30. I like to use an RSI length of 7 and an overbought and oversold level of 80 and 20 in some of my scripts, so that's why I said 80 there. But this is the standard RSI that you would normally see in a script. 14 period, 70 overbought, 30 oversold. If I save this code, we now have our lines drawing onto the chart. Another way you could achieve this is using horizontal lines or H lines. So if I plot these H lines, save my code, we get a more traditional RSI aesthetic, at least as far as TradingView is concerned. This is what the inbuilt TradingView RSI normally looks like. Let me throw that on really quickly. So here we have the normal inbuilt TradingView RSI. And notice that the H lines don't actually plot a value onto your indicator values list. That can be helpful to reduce clutter in terms of the data on your chart. So that is one advantage of using H lines or horizontal lines. So let's mimic the inbuilt RSI. We also need an H line of 50. That's the middle point you see there. This line here, we now have that drawing onto our chart as well. And it looks like they've set the transparency of their H line, their center point, to something a little bit more transparent. So let's set ours to color.gray with a 50% transparency and see if that's a little bit closer to what, I think that's what they use in their own RSI indicator. Now let's color the background of our indicator the same way they do here. To do that, I'm pretty sure they just use the fill function and they use these two values here. So we can fill between the upper and lower H line. I can set the color to color.new, color.purple, and let's set the transparency of this to, let's try 75%. And we're getting something a little bit closer. So let me try setting the transparency to 90%. There we go. Now we're a lot closer, 95%. Now we have a very similar RSI indicator drawing to the inbuilt RSI. Now, one other thing I should mention with these TA indicators is that when you're working with them in Pine, if you want to reference the code of a built-in indicator, you can actually open up the source code to them by clicking on that little button you see there, the little curly brackets, and that will open up the actual Pine script code, the TradingView backend code, the inbuilt code for this indicator. Now you'll notice that there's not a lot of commenting here. There's not a lot of explanation of what the code does. They do that to make these scripts more efficient when they're running on thousands and thousands, if not millions of charts simultaneously of all of us users using TradingView. So all the inbuilt indicator script source codes will be minimalistic like this. So keep that in mind. It'll be a little bit hard to read, but you can reference this code if you need to. Anyway, let's get rid of the RSI. And as I said, this lesson is just an introduction to these concepts. So I'm not going to do the same thing we did here with the RSI, with the MACD and the stochastic, because it'll just make this lesson way too long. But you get the idea. Let's have a look at some of the other indicator values. So I'm going to change this to say indicator value, if I can spell, indicator value, and we'll set TA to, let's have a look at stochastic. So the stochastic indicator takes a source, a high, a low, and a length. So let me throw a stochastic on. So for this, I'm going to base my stochastic on a closing price. I'm going to pass in the current bar's high, the current bar's low, and a length of 14. And let's plot that onto the chart, see what we get. So I have a stochastic indicator drawing here. And now you can see that our blue lines are identical. So we are getting the stochastic value and plotting that onto our chart using the ta.stock inbuilt function. Now, if you want to get the orange line here, that's a little more complicated. We'll cover that in a future lesson when we get to actually building trading tools. But for now, hopefully you are starting to understand what the TA namespace is for. Before we move on to a couple of other examples, let's draw a moving average onto our chart. So I'm going to open up our overlay code here, and let's just get a simple 50 EMA. So for this, I'm going to set EMA to TA dot and then control space. If I type in MA here, we'll get a list of all of the different moving averages, moving average types we have to select from. I want an EMA, so I'm going to click on that. I'll give it a source of close and a length of 50, and let's plot that onto the chart. Save our code, and now we have a moving average drawing over price action because overlay is set to true on this script source code. Let's have a quick look at one other function here. Let's have a look at, well, we can draw the ATR. That's very easy. It's just ATR, and then it takes a length, a look back length. By default, it's normally 14. If I save that, we're getting the ATR value. And one side note, it's probably obvious, but you don't need to plot this onto the chart if you don't want to. So you can reference all of these indicator values in your script. Plotting them is optional. You should only plot them to the chart if it makes sense to, based on what you're doing with your script. If your user needs to see something like a moving average, then obviously draw it onto the chart. But if it's a background condition or something that they don't need to see, you don't need to draw it on the chart if you don't want to. Or if you want to draw the value onto the chart, but you don't want to be able to see it. For example, let's say we wanted to draw the ATR value onto our overlay chart. If I save this script, my chart should be okay because I've set my scale, my price scale correctly. But for a user that hasn't set up their price scale correctly, drawing the ATR onto your chart can screw up their chart display. So if I bring this right down, you can see that we're actually drawing the ATR value to actually over price action. The reason we don't see it on my chart is because I have my chart set to auto, and I've set my chart scale to scale price chart only. If I turn this off where my mouse is now, if I click on this, now it skews my chart to include the ATR value down here, which can be a real problem in your scripts. So that is something to be cautious of when drawing certain indicator values onto your chart. Now, there's not any way around this that I know of other than changing your price scale to scale price chart only, but that's something worth mentioning. Be cautious of this. If your chart looks all screwed up, it could be that you're drawing a value over price action and you do not have your price scale set correctly. So let's wrap up this lesson by looking at one other TA function just to drill home how this works. Let's look at the MACD. And so the MACD takes a price source, a fast length, a slow length, and a signal length. So I'm actually not that familiar with the MACD. I don't use it in my own trading. So I'm not sure what the default values for this is. Let me throw on a MACD really quickly to see what the stock inbuilt MACD comes with. So 12, 26, and 9. 12, 26, 9. So hopefully that's accurate. Let me save my script and see what we get here. Compile error. Of course. So I'm getting an error here because this function is quite unique compared to other functions. This function returns what is called a tuple. So in order to extract the MACD line, the signal line, and the histogram line from this function, this particular MACD function, we need to use what is called a tuple operator. So to do that, we open these square brackets, and I can type in here MACD line, comma, sig line, comma, and histogram line, or just hist line. And now I should be able to plot all of these values separately in my script. So let's save the code here. There we go, that's working. So we're using a tuple here. Basically, a tuple is just a line of code that returns multiple values or variable values from a single function. So here we are getting 3 separate values from this MACD function and then plotting them onto the chart. If I hover my mouse over this last bar here, and I've got a duplicate here, I can get rid of one of those. I'm not sure how that happened. You can see that our values are identical down here. They're just in a different order. So I need to plot what I'm plotting here first, the hist thing first, and the rest of it can stay like that. Let me save the code here. And there we go. Now our values are in the correct order. And to plot a MACD the same way that we have here. If you're unfamiliar with how to style a plot, make sure to watch the plot function in the very first basics section of this course, because that's where I explain what all of these parameters do. But what we need to do here is set the style to plot.style_histogram, and we need to set the hist base to 0. And now if I save the code, we are getting a more MACD styled indicator drawing here. Now I'm not going to go and format all of these plots and style them to be identical as the MACD, because we'll cover that in future lessons. But for now, that will do it for an introduction to the TA namespace. If you feel a little bit overwhelmed by all of the information that we just covered here, don't worry. The only thing I want you to take away from this lesson is the TA namespace. That's where all of our technical analysis functions live. And in future lessons, I will be showing you how to use all of these step by step in practical demonstration and example use cases. So for now, just remember, if you want something like an RSI value, it's ta.control space. Here is where all of those functions will be when the time comes to work with indicator values. So that will do it for this lesson. I will speak with you in the next one.